A husband abandoned his wife and 3 children in a broken mountain cabin in the middle of winter. No electricity, no water, no heat. They had days to survive. But what this mother did in that cabin changed hundreds of lives. Comment what city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel because this true story from Tennessee will leave you speechless. Smoky Mountains, USA. The cabin door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the Smoky Mountains of eastern Tennessee. Rebecca Carter stood frozen in the doorway, her 3 children huddled behind her, as her husband David's pickup truck roared down the rough mountain road, disappearing into the thick fog that blanketed the valley below. He was gone. Really gone. Rebecca was 32 years old, with 3 children: Emma, age 9, Jacob, age 6, and little Sophia, just 18 months old. They stood in a cabin that was barely standing, walls with gaps where the wind whistled through, a roof that leaked in at least 4 places, broken windows covered with rotting plywood, and a floor so warped that walking across it felt like crossing a frozen lake. No electricity. No running water. No heat except for an old wood-burning stove that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. It was late October. Winter was coming to the Smokies. And David had just left them here. The cabin belonged to David's grandfather, who had died 15 years ago. It had sat abandoned ever since. Deep in the mountains, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that became impassable in winter. No neighbors for miles. No cell phone signal. No way to call for help. David had brought them here 2 days ago, saying they needed a family retreat to reconnect after months of stress. Rebecca had been reluctant. They'd been arguing constantly, money was tight, and David's drinking had gotten worse. But she'd hoped maybe time away would help. Instead, it had been the setup for abandonment. That morning, David had woken up angry. He'd been drinking the night before, and when Rebecca confronted him about the empty whiskey bottle, he'd exploded. "I can't do this anymore," he'd shouted. 3 kids, bills I can't pay, a wife who never stops nagging. "I'm done. I'm done." "David, what are you talking about? We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. I'm leaving." "You wanted this family so badly? It's yours. Figure it out." Rebecca had thought he meant he was leaving the cabin for a walk to cool off. But then he'd started loading his things into the truck. "David, stop. This is insane. We're in the middle of nowhere. The kids will be fine. You'll figure something out. You always do. There's no phone service here. No electricity. Winter is coming. Then you'd better get creative." He'd thrown his duffel bag into the truck bed. "I left you some supplies. Should last a few days. Someone will find you eventually. There are hikers on these trails sometimes." "Sometimes? David, it's almost November. Nobody hikes up here in winter." But David had already climbed into the truck. Through the windshield, Rebecca saw something that chilled her more than the mountain air. His face was completely blank. No anger. No regret. No emotion at all. He'd already checked out. This wasn't an impulse decision born from a fight. This was planned. Emma, 9 years old and too perceptive for her own good, had asked quietly, "Mommy, is Daddy leaving us?" Rebecca couldn't answer. Couldn't speak. Just watched the truck disappear down the mountain. Now, standing in the doorway of the broken cabin, Rebecca forced herself to breathe, to think, to assess. The children were looking at her with wide, frightened eyes. Emma was trying to be brave, holding Jacob's hand. Jacob looked confused, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Sophia, in Rebecca's arms, was starting to fuss, sensing the tension. "It's okay," Rebecca said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're going to be okay." But she wasn't sure she believed it. Rebecca walked back into the cabin and took inventory of what David had left them. A cooler with maybe 3 days' worth of food, sandwich supplies, some fruit, crackers, peanut butter, a case of bottled water, 24 bottles, sleeping bags, 4 of them, a flashlight with batteries, matches, and a lighter, Rebecca's purse with her wallet, phone, useless without signal, and $67 in cash, the clothes they'd packed for a weekend trip, a small first aid kit, that was it. No winter coats, they'd left those in David's truck thinking they'd only be here a few days. No serious camping gear. No way to cook except the broken-looking stove. No way to keep warm except that same stove. Rebecca checked her phone again. 0 bars. She'd have to hike down the mountain to find signal. But how far? And could she do it with 3 young children, including a toddler? She looked out at the mountain landscape. Beautiful but brutal. The nearest town was Gatlinburg, but Rebecca had no idea how far. David had driven for what felt like forever on winding roads to get here. The sun was already starting to sink lower. They had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. Decision time. Rebecca gathered the children in the main room of the cabin. Really the only room except for a tiny side room that might have once been a bedroom. "Okay, guys. Listen to Mommy. Daddy had to leave, but we're going to be fine. We're going to treat this like an adventure, okay?" "An adventure?" Jacob said, his voice small. "Yes. We're going to camp here for a little bit until we can get help. But I need you all to be brave and help me, okay?" Emma, wise beyond her years, said quietly, "Daddy's not coming back, is he?" Rebecca's throat tightened. "I don't know, honey. But what I do know is that we're going to take care of each other. We're a team. Can you help me?" Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. "What do we do?" Rebecca felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there, cold and sharp, but underneath it, something else was rising. Determination. Maternal instinct. Survival mode. "First, we make this cabin safe and warm. Jacob, I need you to help me gather wood for the stove. Emma, you're in charge of Sophia. Keep her away from anything dangerous. Can you do that?" "Yes, Mommy." Rebecca stood up, Sophia on her hip. "Let's get to work. We're going to survive this." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rebecca and Jacob collected fallen branches and dead wood from around the cabin. There was plenty, the forest floor was covered with it. But it was damp from recent rain, which would make it harder to burn. Rebecca examined the wood stove. It was old and rusty, but structurally intact. The chimney pipe looked questionable, there were gaps where it connected, but it would have to do. Carbon monoxide poisoning was a risk, but freezing to death was a certainty without heat. She arranged kindling in the stove using dry bark and small twigs, then struck a match. The flame caught. She added slightly larger pieces, blowing gently to feed the fire. Smoke filled the cabin for a moment before finding its way up the chimney. Not perfect, but it worked. Heat began to radiate from the stove. While Rebecca worked on the fire, Emma kept Sophia entertained, singing songs and playing simple games. Jacob continued hauling wood, proud to be helping. As darkness fell, Rebecca used the flashlight sparingly, knowing the batteries wouldn't last forever. She made sandwiches for dinner, peanut butter for the kids, the last of the lunch meat for herself. They ate in silence, huddled around the wood stove. Then Rebecca arranged the sleeping bags in the main room, close to the heat source. "Are we safe here, Mommy?" Jacob asked as she tucked him in. "Yes, baby. We're safe. Mommy's here. I'll keep you safe." "What about Daddy?" Rebecca's jaw clenched. "Don't worry about Daddy. Worry about us. We're what matters now." After the children fell asleep, Rebecca sat by the stove, feeding it wood to keep the fire going, and allowed herself 5 minutes to cry silently. David had abandoned them. Left them in a broken cabin in the mountains with minimal supplies and no way to call for help. But Rebecca had survived worse. She'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, learning early that you couldn't depend on anyone but yourself. She'd thought David was different. Thought she'd finally found someone stable. Someone who'd stay. She'd been wrong. But she wouldn't let her children pay for her mistake. Tomorrow, she'd figure out a plan. Maybe hike down for help. Maybe find a way to signal someone. Maybe. Rebecca's planning was interrupted by a sound outside the cabin. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. She froze, her heart pounding. Someone, or something, was outside. And in the darkness of the Smoky Mountains, she had no idea what was coming next. Rebecca grabbed the only weapon she could find, a thick piece of firewood, and positioned herself between the door and her sleeping children. The footsteps continued. Slow. Circling the cabin. Then they stopped at the door. 3 sharp knocks. Rebecca's breath caught. An animal wouldn't knock. This was a person. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. A pause. Then a man's voice, rough but not threatening. "Name's Tom Whitfield. I live about 2 miles down the mountain. Saw smoke from your chimney. That cabin's been empty for 15 years. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." Rebecca didn't lower the firewood. "We're fine. Thank you for checking." "Ma'am," with respect, "it's 35 degrees out here and dropping. That cabin's got more holes than walls. You got kids in there. I can hear 'em breathing. You're not fine." Rebecca stood frozen, torn between suspicion and desperate hope. What if this was a trick? What if this stranger was dangerous? But what if he was genuine? What if he could help? "I'm a park ranger," the voice continued. "Retired. Got identification if you want to see it. Just want to help if you need it." Rebecca made a decision. She cracked the door open slightly, keeping the chain, rusty but intact, across the gap. Through the opening, she saw a man in his mid-60s, weathered face, graying beard, wearing a heavy coat and carrying a lantern. He held up an ID card, Tennessee State Parks, Ranger Tom Whitfield, retired. "What are you doing up here, ma'am? This cabin's not safe for living, especially with winter coming." Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Tears welled up. "My husband, he left us here. Drove away this morning. We have no car, no phone service, 3 kids. I don't know what to do." Tom's expression shifted from concern to anger. "He left you here? Deliberately?" "Yes. That's not just abandonment. That's attempted murder. These mountains will kill you if you're not prepared." He paused. "Ma'am, I got a truck down the road a piece. Let me take you and your kids somewhere safe. Tonight. Every instinct in Rebecca screamed caution. Trust no one. Especially not strange men in the woods. But those instincts had also told her to trust David. And Ranger Tom Whitfield had kind eyes. Concerned eyes. Not the blank, emotionless eyes David had shown her that morning. Okay, Rebecca said quietly. But the kids are asleep. Can we wait until morning? Morning's fine. I'll camp outside your door tonight, make sure nothing bothers you. Got my camping gear in the truck. At first light, we'll get you out of here. Why would you do that? Camp outside for strangers. Tom smiled sadly. I had a daughter once. She and her 2 kids got left by her husband in a bad situation. I wasn't there in time to help her. She didn't make it. So now, when I see families in trouble. He trailed off. I help. That's all. Rebecca felt tears flowing freely now. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's get you safe first. True to his word, Tom set up a small tent just outside the cabin door. Rebecca could hear him moving around, building a fire, settling in. For the first time in 2 days, she felt a tiny bit of hope. She fed the wood stove, checked on the children, all 3 sleeping peacefully, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, and finally allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow they'd leave this mountain. Tomorrow they'd be safe. But as Rebecca drifted off to sleep, a thought occurred to her. David had left them here thinking they'd die or suffer. Thinking she'd be helpless and desperate. He was wrong. She wasn't helpless. And she wasn't done fighting. At dawn, Tom helped Rebecca pack their few belongings. The children woke up confused to see a stranger, but Emma, perceptive as always, seemed to understand that this man was helping them. They hiked down to where Tom's truck was parked, about a half-mile down the rough road. It was a sturdy 4x4, well-equipped for mountain terrain. Where are we going? Rebecca asked as they loaded in. First, Ranger Station in Gatlinburg. We need to report what your husband did, get the authorities involved. Then, I know a place that helps families in crisis. They can give you shelter, help you figure out next steps. I have $67 to my name, Rebecca said quietly. I can't afford. It's free. Funded by donations and grants. You qualify. As they drove down the mountain, Rebecca watched the cabin disappear in the rearview mirror. That horrible place where David had tried to abandon them to die. But something was nagging at her. A thought forming in the back of her mind. That cabin. That property. It belonged to David's family. Probably to David now, after his grandfather's death. Which meant, legally, it might belong to her too. They were still married. And if she could somehow fix it up, make it livable. No. That was crazy. The cabin was a wreck. It would take thousands of dollars and months of work to make it habitable. But the land, the location, the property itself had value. Rebecca filed the thought away for later. First, survival. Then, maybe, revenge. At the ranger station, Rebecca gave a full statement to the local sheriff. The story shocked everyone who heard it. This is criminal abandonment and child endangerment, Sheriff Morrison said grimly. We'll put out a warrant for David Carter immediately. Do you know where he might have gone? Probably back to our apartment in Knoxville. Or maybe to his brother's place in Nashville. We'll find him. I promise you that. Tom drove Rebecca and the children to the Hope Harbor Family Center in Gatlinburg, a non-profit that provided emergency housing and services for families in crisis. The director, a warm woman named Patricia Chen, welcomed them immediately. She showed them to a clean, safe room with real beds, a bathroom, heating. After 2 nights in a broken cabin, it felt like a palace. "You can stay here for up to 90 days while you get back on your feet," Patricia explained. "We provide meals, childcare, counseling, job placement assistance, and legal advocacy. Whatever you need." "I need to figure out how to support 3 kids on my own," Rebecca said. "I was a bookkeeper before Emma was born, but I haven't worked in years. David wanted me to stay home with the kids." "We'll help you. We have a job training program and partnerships with local employers. You're not alone in this." For the first time in 2 days, Rebecca felt something shift. The terror was fading, replaced by determination. David had tried to destroy them. Instead, he'd freed them. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca threw herself into rebuilding her life. She enrolled in an accounting refresher course through Hope Harbor's job training program. She applied for emergency food assistance and Medicaid for the children. She met with a family law attorney who agreed to take her case pro bono. "You have grounds for an immediate divorce based on abandonment," the attorney explained. "And you'll get full custody. No judge will give custody to a man who left his wife and 3 kids in an abandoned cabin." "What about child support?" "We'll pursue it aggressively. If he has income or assets, we'll garnish them." "He does have assets," Rebecca said slowly. "That cabin and the land it's on. His grandfather left it to him. It's probably worth something." The attorney made a note. "We'll look into it. Mountain property in the Smokies can be quite valuable, depending on location and acreage." A plan was beginning to form in Rebecca's mind. A wild, ambitious plan that would either be brilliant or completely insane. She needed to talk to Tom. Tom Whitfield had visited Rebecca and the kids several times since bringing them to Hope Harbor. He'd brought toys for the children, groceries, encouragement. "You're doing great," he'd told Rebecca after her first week. "Most people would have fallen apart. You're fighting. I learned early in life that nobody's going to save you. You have to save yourself." "That's true. But it's also okay to accept help when it's offered." Rebecca smiled. "I'm working on that." On one of his visits, Rebecca shared her idea. They sat in the Hope Harbor common room while the kids played nearby. "Tom, that cabin. The property. It's probably legally joint marital property, which means I have a claim to it. What if I fixed it up? Made it livable? Used it somehow?" Tom raised his eyebrows. "That's a massive project. That cabin's barely standing." "I know. But the location is incredible. Deep in the mountains, surrounded by forest. People pay money for that kind of access." "What are you thinking? What if it could be more than just a cabin? What if it could be a place that helps people?" Tom studied her. "Go on. There are other women like me. Families in crisis. What if that cabin, that place where David tried to kill us, became a place that saved families instead? A retreat center. A place where mothers and kids escaping bad situations could come for a week or 2, away from the chaos, to breathe and heal and plan." "That's ambitious." "It's crazy, I know. But I can't stop thinking about it. David tried to use that place to destroy us. What if we used it to help hundreds of families? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. You know what? I think it's brilliant. And I think I can help. Over the next 6 months, Rebecca's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. David was arrested in Nashville, living with his brother and working under the table to avoid paying any support. He was charged with criminal abandonment, child endangerment, and reckless endangerment. His bail was set at $100,000, which he couldn't make. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. With David in jail and his actions so clearly documented, the judge granted Rebecca everything she asked for: full custody, child support, and, most importantly, 50% interest in all marital property, including the mountain cabin and the 20 acres of land it sat on. Your husband claims the property was his inheritance and shouldn't be subject to division, Rebecca's attorney explained. But since he inherited it during the marriage and never put it in a separate trust, it's marital property. You're entitled to half. I don't want to sell it, Rebecca said. I want to buy out his half. The attorney looked surprised. With what money? That property, even in its current condition, is probably worth $200,000. His half would be $100,000. I'm going to find a way. Tom Whitfield had been researching grants and funding opportunities. One evening, he came to Hope Harbor with news. There's a federal grant program for rural community development, he explained. It provides funding to create services in underserved areas. Your idea, a retreat center for families in crisis in the remote Smokies, that fits perfectly. How much funding? Up to $250,000 for property acquisition and construction. Rebecca's heart leaped. That could buy out David's half and fund the renovation. Exactly. But you'd need to write a grant proposal. Detailed plans. Budget projections. Letters of support from community organizations. I can do that. Rebecca felt energy coursing through her. When's the deadline? 60 days. Then we'd better get started. For the next 2 months, Rebecca worked like she'd never worked before. She took online courses in nonprofit management and grant writing. She created detailed architectural plans for the cabin renovation, working with a volunteer architect who believed in the project. She developed budgets, timelines, service plans. Patricia from Hope Harbor wrote a letter of support. So did the sheriff who'd arrested David. So did 3 other family services organizations in the region. Tom helped with every aspect, using his knowledge of the mountains and construction to make the plans realistic and achievable. Emma, Jacob, and Sophia adjusted to their new life at Hope Harbor. Emma blossomed in school, her confidence growing without David's volatile presence. Jacob stopped having nightmares. Sophia, too young to remember her father, was simply happy with her mother and siblings. On the day Rebecca submitted the grant application, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. Whatever happens, you should be proud, Tom said. You've built something real here. We haven't gotten the grant yet. Doesn't matter. You've already won. You survived. You protected your kids. You turned trauma into purpose. That's the real victory. 2 months later, Rebecca received a thick envelope in the mail. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Ms. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that your application for rural community development funding has been approved. Your project, Mountain Haven Family Retreat, will receive $235,000 in grant funding over 3 years. Rebecca read the letter 3 times before it fully sank in. They'd gotten it. The funding. Everything they needed. She called Tom immediately, crying and laughing at the same time. We did it. We actually did it. No, Tom said warmly. You did it. I just helped. This was your vision, your work, your determination. What do we do now? Now, we build. The legal process of buying out David's interest in the property took another 2 months. David, facing prison time and desperate for any money, agreed to sell his half for $90,000, below market value, but he had no leverage to negotiate. Rebecca used the grant money to purchase his share, giving her full ownership of the property. In the spring, almost a year after David had abandoned them, Rebecca stood in front of the cabin with Tom, Emma, Jacob, and Sophia. It looked exactly the same as the night they'd been left there. Broken, rotting, dangerous. But Rebecca didn't see it that way anymore. She saw potential. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's build something beautiful. The renovation took 8 months. Tom, who'd built his own house years ago, served as the general contractor. They hired local workers when they needed expertise, electricians, plumbers, roofers, but did much of the basic labor themselves. Rebecca learned to swing a hammer, install drywall, paint walls. Emma and Jacob helped with age-appropriate tasks, learning the value of hard work. Even little Sophia contributed by handing tools to her mother and supervising the work. They tore down the rotting walls and rebuilt them properly, with insulation and solid construction. They replaced the leaking roof with metal roofing that would last decades. They installed solar panels for electricity, expensive up front but practical in the remote location. They dug a well for water and installed a septic system. The single-room cabin was expanded into a proper structure with 4 private bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a commercial kitchen, and a large common room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. They built a playground outside for children, created hiking trails through the 20 acres, installed a fire pit for evening gatherings. By late fall, the transformation was complete. The broken cabin where Rebecca and her children had nearly died was now a beautiful, comfortable, safe retreat center. Rebecca stood in the finished common room, looking at the space they'd created, and felt tears streaming down her face. It's perfect, she whispered. Tom put a hand on her shoulder. Your family nearly died here. Now hundreds of other families will find life here. That's powerful. I want to name it properly, Rebecca said. Not Mountain Haven. Something more meaningful. What are you thinking? The Phoenix Center. Because we rose from the ashes of what David tried to destroy. Tom smiled. Perfect. The Phoenix Center opened in December, just over a year after the abandonment. The first family arrived on a cold winter evening, a mother with 2 young children escaping domestic violence. Rebecca welcomed them at the door, remembering her own terror that night when David had left them. Now she was the one providing safety. You're safe here, Rebecca told the frightened mother. Take all the time you need to rest and heal. We'll help you figure out next steps. The woman broke down crying. Thank you. I didn't know where else to go. I know exactly how you feel. I was in your shoes just over a year ago. But you're going to be okay. I promise. Over the next year, the Phoenix Center served 35 families. Word spread through social service networks about the unique retreat center deep in the Smoky Mountains where families in crisis could find sanctuary. Rebecca developed a model that worked. Families could stay for up to 2 weeks, completely free. During that time, they received safe housing and meals counseling services, help developing safety plans, connection to resources for housing, employment, legal aid for kids, therapeutic play activities, and time in nature for mothers. Time to breathe and plan without immediate danger. The isolation that made the location dangerous during the abandonment now made it perfect for families needing to disappear temporarily from abusive situations. The mountain setting provided healing, hiking, fresh air, natural beauty that helped traumatized families begin to recover. Rebecca hired 2 staff members, a counselor and a case manager. Tom volunteered regularly, maintaining the property and leading hiking trips with the kids. Emma, now 11, sometimes helped with the younger children who came through. Jacob, 8, took pride in showing visiting kids the trails he'd helped build. Sophia, 3, barely remembered the cabin's original state. To her, it had always been a place of warmth and safety. Rebecca's life had stability for the first time since David left. The grant funded operations for 3 years, and she was already applying for additional funding to sustain the program long-term. David was sentenced to 3 years in prison for abandonment and child endangerment. He'd be eligible for parole in 18 months. Rebecca didn't think about him much anymore. He'd tried to destroy her family, but instead he'd given her purpose. One evening, almost 2 years after the abandonment, Rebecca sat on the deck of the Phoenix Center watching the sunset over the mountains. A family was inside, a mother and 3 kids, staying for their second week, already showing signs of healing and renewed strength. Tom joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You've built something extraordinary here," he said. "We built it together. I couldn't have done it without you. You'd have found a way. You're the most determined person I've ever met." Rebecca smiled. "I learned early that the world doesn't care if you're struggling. You have to fight for yourself. For your kids. How are you doing? Really? Honestly? For the first time in my entire life, I'm happy. I have purpose. The kids are thriving. We're helping people. David tried to kill us, but instead he freed us. Any regrets? Only that I didn't leave him sooner. But I guess I needed to hit rock bottom before I found the strength to build something new." That cabin represented your rock bottom. Now it represents hope for dozens of families. Rebecca nodded. "That's the whole point, isn't it? Our worst moments don't have to define us. They can become the foundation for something better." 3 years after the abandonment, the Phoenix Center had transformed from a desperate idea into a thriving reality. Rebecca, now 35, stood in the expanded facility. No longer just the original cabin, but now including a second building they'd constructed the previous year. The property had grown to serve families more comprehensively. The original cabin had been converted into the main residence with 4 private bedrooms and common spaces. The new building housed offices, a counseling room, a classroom for workshops, and a commercial kitchen capable of feeding multiple families at once. The Phoenix Center had served over 100 families in 3 years. Each story was different, but all shared one thing. They arrived broken and left with hope. Rebecca had developed a model that worked. Families could stay for up to 2 weeks, completely free. During that time, they received counseling, help with safety planning, connections to resources for housing and employment, and, most importantly, time to breathe and heal in the peaceful mountain setting. The isolation that had nearly killed Rebecca's family now saved others. Abusive partners couldn't find their families here. The stress of city life fell away. Nature provided healing that no therapy room could match. Tom Whitfield, now 70, remained deeply involved. He'd officially joined as volunteer coordinator and property manager, maintaining the buildings and leading hiking groups with visiting children. Emma, now 12, had become passionate about helping families. She often assisted with younger children, reading to them or playing games while their mothers met with counselors. Jacob, 9, took pride in the trails he'd helped maintain. He knew every path on the property and loved showing visiting kids the best spots for seeing deer or finding interesting rocks. Sophia, 4, was too young to remember that terrifying night when David abandoned them. To her, the cabin had always been a place of warmth and safety, where new friends came to stay. One spring afternoon, Rebecca was working in her office when Patricia from Hope Harbor called. "Rebecca, there's a filmmaker who wants to talk to you about documenting the Phoenix Center. She's done work for several streaming services and thinks your story could inspire similar projects nationwide." "I don't know, Patricia. This isn't about me getting famous. It's about helping families. That's exactly why you should do it. Think how many more families could be helped if other communities created their own Phoenix centers. Your model works. It should be replicated." Rebecca considered this. "Let me meet with her first. See what she has in mind." The filmmaker, Karen Rodriguez, arrived the following week. She spent 3 days at the Phoenix Center, observing operations and talking with families who agreed to share their stories. "This is extraordinary," Karen told Rebecca. "You've created something that addresses a real gap in services. Rural families in crisis have nowhere to go. You've filled that need. It's not just me. It's Tom, our staff, our volunteers, the community." "I know. But it started with you. With your refusal to let what David did define you. That's powerful. What exactly are you proposing?" "A documentary. 6 months of filming here, capturing the stories of families you serve. Showing the transformation that happens. Making it clear that this model can work anywhere." "Would the families be comfortable with that?" "Only the ones who volunteer. And we'd protect their identities if needed. But Rebecca, some of them want to share their stories. They want other families to know there's hope." Rebecca thought about her own journey. How isolated she'd felt. How alone. If other families could see that there was help, that transformation was possible. "Okay. Let's do it." Over the next 6 months, Karen's crew filmed at the Phoenix Center. They captured the arrival of frightened families, the gradual relaxation as they felt safe, the moments of breakthrough in counseling, the laughter of children playing in the mountains, and the tearful departures when families left to start their new lives. They also documented Rebecca's story, interviewing her, Emma, Jacob, Tom, and even Patricia from Hope Harbor. The full narrative of abandonment, survival, and transformation. "I need to ask," Karen said during Rebecca's main interview. "Do you have any contact with David?" "No. He was released from prison 8 months ago after serving his full sentence. I was notified of his release, but he hasn't contacted me." "How do you feel about what he did now?" 3 years later. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I don't hate him anymore. I don't think about him much at all. What he did was terrible and nearly killed us. But it also inadvertently freed us and gave me a purpose I never would have found otherwise. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but I also wouldn't change what came from it. That's forgiveness. No. Forgiveness would mean excusing what he did. I don't excuse it. I just don't let it control me anymore. He tried to destroy us and failed. We built something beautiful from his failure. That's not forgiveness. That's victory. The documentary, titled The Phoenix Center, Rising from Abandonment, premiered at a film festival 9 months later and was picked up by a major streaming service. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, enough to fund operations for years. Other organizations reached out, wanting to learn the model. Politicians called, asking how they could support similar programs in their districts. Most powerfully, hundreds of families reached out saying they needed help. The need was far greater than Rebecca had imagined. "We can't serve them all," Rebecca told Tom one evening as they reviewed the flood of requests. "We only have space for a few families at a time." Then maybe it's time to expand the model. Help other people create Phoenix centers in their areas. I wouldn't even know how to do that. Sure you would. You created this from nothing. You could teach others to do the same. The idea took root. With the influx of donations and the visibility from the documentary, Rebecca established the Phoenix Center Network, a non-profit umbrella organization dedicated to helping communities create their own crisis retreat centers. Over the next year, Rebecca consulted with 3 communities looking to establish similar programs, one in Montana, one in rural Maine, and one in West Virginia. She shared everything she'd learned, the model, the funding strategies, the partnerships needed, the operational details. "Don't just copy what we did," she told each group. "Adapt it to your community. Understand your local needs. But the core principles stay the same: safe space, comprehensive support, time to heal, no judgment." By the time Emma turned 14, there were 4 Phoenix centers operating across the United States, collectively serving over 200 families per year. Rebecca had become a recognized expert in family crisis intervention, invited to speak at conferences and consult with organizations. But she remained rooted in the original Phoenix Center, still personally welcoming families and working hands-on with operations. "Why don't you just run the network full-time?" Patricia asked during one of their regular check-ins. "You could have a bigger impact coordinating all the centers." "Because I never want to lose touch with why we do this. The moment I'm not personally helping families, I've lost the thread. This isn't about building an empire. It's about helping people one family at a time." Emma, now deeply involved in volunteer work at the center, told Rebecca one evening, "I want to do this when I grow up. Work with families like you do. You can do whatever you want with your life, sweetheart. You don't have to follow my path." "I'm not following your path. I'm choosing my own path. But you showed me that our worst experiences can become our greatest teachers. I want to use what I learned to help others." Rebecca hugged her daughter, overwhelmed with pride. Emma had taken her trauma and transformed it into compassion. That was true healing. When David finally did make contact, a letter forwarded through Rebecca's attorney, she almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. The letter was brief. "Rebecca, I know I have no right to contact you. I know an apology can't fix what I did. But I've been following the news about the Phoenix Center. I see what you've built, what our kids are becoming. I'm glad you survived despite me. I'm glad you took the worst thing I ever did and made it into something good. I'll stay away. You've made that clear. But I needed you to know I was wrong about everything. And you were right to never forgive me. David. Rebecca read it once, then filed it away. Maybe someday the kids would want to see it. Maybe not. But it didn't change anything. David was her past. The Phoenix Center and her children were her future. 10 years after the abandonment, Rebecca stood on the deck of the Phoenix Center watching the sunrise over the Smoky Mountains. She was 42 years old now. Emma was 19, home from college for the summer. Jacob was 16. Sophia was 11. All three were still deeply connected to the Phoenix Center. It wasn't just their mother's work, it was their family's legacy. The Phoenix Center network had grown to include 12 retreat centers across the United States, serving over 800 families annually. Each center was independently operated, but followed the core model Rebecca had developed. Tom Whitfield, now 77, moved more slowly but remained involved. He'd become a beloved grandfather figure not just to Rebecca's children, but to hundreds of children who'd passed through the center over the years. This morning was special. They were holding the 10th anniversary celebration of the Phoenix Center, and Rebecca had been preparing her speech for weeks. As families began arriving, former residents returning to celebrate, staff, volunteers, community partners, even some of the funders who'd supported them, Rebecca felt a wave of emotion. She thought back to that terrifying night 10 years ago. Standing in the doorway of this cabin, watching David drive away, convinced they would die. She'd been so scared, so lost. Now, standing in almost the exact same spot, she was surrounded by life, hope, and purpose. Emma joined her on the deck. "You ready for your speech, Mom?" "I think so. It's hard to put 10 years into words. Just tell the truth. That's what you always do." The celebration began with a tour of the facilities for those who hadn't been there before. Rebecca walked them through the original cabin, now beautifully restored but with photos on the walls showing what it had looked like that first night. "This is where my husband abandoned me and our 3 children," Rebecca explained to the group. "This room was falling apart. That window was broken and covered with rotting plywood. The roof leaked. There was no heat except that wood stove, which barely worked." She pointed to a photo. "That's what it looked like 10 years ago. We should have died here. But we didn't. And now this place has saved over 500 families." After the tour, everyone gathered in the common room. Rebecca stood before the crowd, about 70 people packed into the space, and began her speech. 10 years ago today, I was abandoned in this cabin with my 3 children. My daughter Emma was 9. My son Jacob was 6. My baby Sophia was 18 months old. My husband David left us here deliberately, with minimal supplies, in a place with no electricity, no running water, no phone service, and winter approaching. He thought we'd die, or at least suffer enough to punish me for what he saw as my failures as a wife. Instead, we were saved by Tom Whitfield. Rebecca gestured to Tom, who waved from his seat, a retired park ranger who saw smoke from our fire and came to investigate. Tom helped us get to safety and then helped me transform this cabin from a death trap into a sanctuary. I tell you this not to dwell on trauma, but to explain why the Phoenix Center exists. Because I know what it feels like to be desperate and abandoned. I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn. And I know that sometimes, in our darkest moments, we need someone to see us and choose to help rather than judge. That's what Tom did for me. And that's what the Phoenix Center does for every family that comes through these doors. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. Over the past 10 years, we've served 523 families at this location alone. That represents over 1,200 individual women and children who found safety here. 93% of them successfully transitioned to stable, safe situations. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about Maria, who came here fleeing domestic violence and now owns her own catering business. It's about Jennifer, whose house burned down and who used her 2 weeks here to rebuild her life. It's about Keisha, who was homeless with 2 kids and now has stable housing and a career as a medical assistant. Every family has a story. Every person who walks through these doors is more than their worst moment. And that's what the Phoenix Center teaches us. We are not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by what we do next. My ex-husband tried to destroy us. Instead, he accidentally freed us and gave us a purpose. This cabin that should have been our grave became a birthplace for hope. Rebecca looked at her children. My kids grew up here. They learned that trauma doesn't have to destroy you. That bad experiences can become good purposes. That helping others heals us too. Emma stood up. Can I say something, Mom? Rebecca nodded, surprised. Emma walked to the front. I'm Emma. I was 9 when my dad abandoned us here. I remember everything about that night. The cold, the fear, not understanding why Daddy would leave us. But I also remember my mom's face. She was terrified, but she didn't give up. She made a fire. She fed us. She told us we'd be okay. And we were. Growing up here, watching families come through, seeing my mom help people, it taught me what real strength looks like. Not the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite the fear. I'm studying social work at UT now because of what I learned here. When I graduate, I'm coming back to work at the Phoenix Center. Because this place saved my family, and I want to help save other families. The room erupted in applause. Rebecca was crying. Tom was crying. Half the room was crying. Jacob stood up next. I'm Jacob. I was 6 when it happened. I don't remember as much as Emma, but I remember being cold and scared. And I remember my mom holding me and telling me we were safe. I spent my whole childhood on these trails, learning about nature from Tom. Now I'm studying environmental conservation because I want to protect places like this, places that give people room to heal. Even Sophia, 11 years old, stood up. I don't remember that night. But I know the story. And I know that something bad happened that became something good. That's what the Phoenix Center is. It's proof that bad things don't have to stay bad. Rebecca could barely speak through her tears. Her children, who should have been destroyed by what David did, had instead become compassionate, purposeful, strong individuals. Tom stood up, using his cane for support. I found this family by accident. Just doing my usual patrol of the mountains, saw smoke where it shouldn't be. When I found Rebecca and those kids in that broken cabin, I knew I had to help. See, I lost my daughter years ago. She died escaping an abusive relationship, taking her 2 kids with her. I wasn't there to help her. I failed her. But I could help Rebecca. And in helping her, I found purpose again. This place, these families, they gave an old man a reason to keep going. So thank you, Rebecca. You saved me as much as I saved you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The celebration continued with food, music, and stories. Former residents shared how the Phoenix Center had changed their lives. Staff talked about the privilege of doing this work. Community partners discussed the impact they'd seen. As evening fell, Rebecca found herself back on the deck with Tom, Emma, Jacob, and Sophia. 10 years, Tom said quietly. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Both, Rebecca agreed. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that night. Wake up in a panic, thinking we're still trapped here. But you're not trapped. You're free. And you freed hundreds of others. Emma put her arm around her mother. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't abandoned us? If he'd been a good husband and father? Rebecca considered this. Sometimes. But, honestly, I think we're better off this way. David's abandonment was terrible, but it forced me to become strong. To find out what I was capable of. If he'd stayed, I might have spent my whole life dependent on someone who didn't deserve my trust. Do you hate him? Sophia asked. No. I don't think about him enough to hate him. He's just a person who made terrible choices that accidentally led to good outcomes. I hope he's found some peace somewhere. But I don't need anything from him. He wrote you last year, Emma said. I saw the letter. Did you read it? I did. He apologized, said he was glad we survived, said he'd stay away. Did it make you feel anything? Relief, mostly. Relief that he understands he has no place in our lives. Relief that he's not trying to disrupt what we've built. Jacob looked at the cabin, now glowing with warm light, full of families and celebration. It's weird that something so terrible created something so good. That's life, honey. We don't choose what happens to us. We only choose what we do with it. Later that night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Rebecca walked alone to the spot where David had abandoned them. She stood there in the darkness, remembering the fear, the cold, the desperation, the certainty that they would die, and then the survival, the fighting, the slow building of something new. 10 years ago, she'd been a terrified woman with no idea how to move forward. Now she was a nationally recognized advocate, a published author. She'd written a book about the Phoenix Center model, a mother of 3 incredible humans, and the founder of a movement that was spreading across the country. The Phoenix Center network now included 12 centers in 9 states. Talks were underway to establish centers in 3 more states. The model was being studied by researchers and replicated by other organizations. What had started as desperate survival had become a legacy. Rebecca pulled out her phone and opened her photo album. She scrolled to a picture taken that first night in the cabin, a selfie she'd taken of herself and the 3 kids huddled by the wood stove, all of them looking exhausted and frightened. Then she scrolled to tonight's celebration photos. The same 4 people, 10 years later. Happy, healthy, strong. Surrounded by people whose lives they'd touched. The contrast was stunning. We did it, Rebecca whispered to the mountain air. We survived. We thrived. And we helped hundreds of others do the same. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the sound of a distant creek. Rebecca stood there for a few more minutes, then walked back into the Phoenix Center, the place that had almost killed her and had instead given her life. She checked on each of her sleeping children. Emma, dreaming of her future career helping families. Jacob, probably dreaming of mountains and trails. Sophia, too young to understand the full weight of their story but old enough to know she was loved and safe. Then Rebecca went to her own room, a small space in the staff quarters, and lay down. Tomorrow, a new family would arrive. A mother with 2 children, fleeing domestic violence. Scared. Desperate. Unsure if there was hope. And Rebecca would welcome them, share her own story, and show them that yes, there was hope. There was always hope. Because she was living proof. 10 years ago, David Carter had tried to abandon his family to death in a broken mountain cabin. Instead, he'd accidentally created a sanctuary that had saved hundreds of families and inspired a national movement. The broken cabin had become a beacon. The place of abandonment had become a place of hope. And the woman he'd tried to destroy had become unstoppable. That was the real ending to the story. Not that they'd survived, but what they'd built from survival. And that legacy would continue long after Rebecca was gone, through her children, through the families they'd helped, through the network of Phoenix centers spreading across the country. David had tried to write their ending. Instead, Rebecca had written a new beginning. For herself. For her children. And for thousands of families who would find hope in the mountains where Rebecca had once found only despair.